Ich begrüße Sie zur ersten Sendung von Wörtlich, der neuen Sendung auf Radio Orange. Dieses Format wird jeden dritten Montag im Monat jeweils von 13 bis 14 Uhr gesendet. Die Inhalte dieser Sendung bestehen aus Interviews, die wir mit Menschen aus den unterschiedlichsten Bereichen führen. In diesen Gesprächen wollen wir bestimmte Themenbereiche, Lebenssituationen und Meinungen kennenlernen, Streitgespräche führen und Positionen auf den Grund gehen. Dabei ist es uns ein besonderes Anliegen, einem transnational-europäischen Kontext, soweit uns das möglich ist, Rechnung zu tragen. Deshalb beginnen wir diese Sendung nicht wegen dem, aber vom historischen Kontext etwas bestärkt, mit den Stimmen einiger Intellektueller aus Bosnien und Herzegowina. In dieser Sendung hören Sie ein Interview mit der bosnischen Lyrikerin Adisa Bašić. In der folgenden führe ich ein Gespräch mit dem Schriftsteller Faruk Šehić. Adisa Bašić ist 1979 in Sarajevo geboren, dort aufgewachsen und war auch während des Bosnienkrieges 1992 bis 1995 in dieser Stadt. Danach hat sie vergleichende Literaturwissenschaften studiert und einen MA im Fachgebiet Menschenrechte absolviert. Für ihre Lyrik und Kurzgeschichten hat sie mehrere Preise und Stipendien erhalten. Sie arbeitet als Assistenzprofessorin für kreatives Schreiben an der Philosophischen Fakultät von Sarajevo, ist Literaturkritikerin und Journalistin. Von Adisa Bašić sind bereits 3 Gedichtbände in bosnischer Sprache erschienen, wobei der dritte auch in einer bosnisch-deutschen Übersetzung 2012 vom Wieser-Verlag herausgegeben wurde, dessen deutscher Titel ein Werbespot für meine Heimat lautet. Das Faszinierende an Bašić' Lyrik war für mich ihre Fähigkeit, in herkömmlichen sozialen Situationen ein Gewaltpotenzial aufspüren zu können, das für gewöhnlich zumeist verdeckt bleibt. Folgendes Gespräch wurde in den letzten Dezembertagen vergangenen Jahres in ihrem Büro an der Philosophischen Fakultät von Sarajevo aufgenommen. Wir sprachen über Lyrik, Gewalt, Feminismus, das Erbe des jugoslawischen Sozialismus, Demokratie und den Prozess der europäischen Integration. Weitere Informationen, wie auch eine Literatur- und Linkliste, finden Sie in den Anmerkungen zur Sendung auf der Radio Orange Homepage. Hören Sie aber nun wörtlich Adisa Bašić. Frau Bašić, Ihre Gedichte kontextualisieren sich sehr oft am gewöhnlichen Alltagsleben. Wobei beim Lesen Ihrer Lyrik für mich besonders auffällig war, dass Sie darin immer wieder ein Gewaltpotenzial eröffnen, das von der subtilen Erfahrung gesellschaftlich konventioneller Machtausübung spricht, das bis hin zur offenen Brutalität reicht. Es gibt sicherlich viele Thematiken, die Sie in Ihren Gedichten ansprechen. Aber ist Gewalt dabei für Sie ein zentrales Thema?
Yeah, I would say so. That violence is one of my major topics, or to put it differently, it is actually the way how we deal with our war experience. What can we do with it? What is the point of it in our life? This is something, having the experience of living 3-4 years within the siege. This is something which marks you for the rest of your life. And being a victim in that way is experience that I find interesting, something with a big creative potential, but also something which is bringing certain kind of danger. And I will explain what do I mean by that. But basically, when I think about this war experience, about this exposure to violence, for me is a big question: how do we deal with that? What do we do with that experience in our life as a person, but also as an artist, as a poet? And I always quote 2 completely different ideas. One of them is by Bosnian satiric writer Ozren Kebo, who says, what is actually my war experience? What did I learn in the war. I just learned, because there was no electricity, I learned how to piss in dark and not to miss the toilet. And this is very ironical, of course, but it says something about how useless and weird the set of experiences and values that you get during the war become after the war. And this is something that I can a lot, make fun of in a certain way. And this is something that I need to work on in order to heal, to forget, and to simply leave behind me. And the other quotation is by poet Marko Vešović, who says what is war experience for him in one of his poems. He said, "For me, it is a sword that I will not take out for any little thing, but at least I will always hold my hand on the grip. Like, it will always be there, it will always be ready." And that gives some more essential, more tragic and serious dimension to this experience, saying that this is something which marks us and defines, in a way, the way how we observe the world after that. Especially being teenager, those formative years are something which is generally important in the life of a young woman. And then being exposed to that enormous amount of violence, of course, influenced me deeply. And my poetry is then reflecting that point of view, that life experience.
Für Sie persönlich liegt der Grund für die Thematik der Gewalt also im Erlebnis des Krieges. Wenn ich aber an die Gedichte Die Alten oder Playboy Balkan-Ausgabe denke, ist die Gewalt dort in einer mehr oder weniger als gewöhnlich zu bezeichnenden sozialen Situation verortet.
Well, unfortunately, violence is omnipresent, and it is present in many different forms. And I think that being in a war makes you sensible, makes you more somehow empfindlicher. You are more easy to detect it, to feel it, to see it. And that's why when I write about post-war society, I'm not interested in war by itself anymore. It is not my subject anymore. But war is a kind of a root to a desert plant. You know, the plant can be very small on the surface, but the root is enormously big and far-reaching. So the social consequences of war are so far-reaching and are present in different forms. And I feel that a lot of violence nowadays is somehow connected or has root in the happenings back in 90s in Bosnian society. But of course, I can just speak about myself. I would not draw some general conclusions about relationship between poetry and violence, how big the creative potential of it is or not. I'm just really speaking from myself.
And would you say that the younger generation, which did not have the experience of the war, has another focus on these topics?
I would love them to have another interests, and some of them do, and they get angry with the talking about war again and again. But we cannot oversee the fact that they, as well as I, are all somehow put in the deep consequences of that what was happening. There's some especially young critics who say enough is enough. Now it should not be a subject in our literature anymore. And I always remember an interview with Herta Miller when she was asked about totalitarianism. Why don't you stop writing about this regime when the regime is over? And she said, well, if one collapsed, it doesn't mean that all of the regimes collapsed. It doesn't mean that the consequences are not there any longer. So the poet, as a person who preserves memory of certain collective experience, I find it also acceptable. But the main reason why am I interested in topic of violence is actually my understanding of victim's position. I find it, as I mentioned before, extremely dangerous because I see there a large potential of making myths out of your own experience and living in a bubble of self-victimization, which somehow brings you in situation that you start legitimizing violence that you make yourself. And I would love to just to remind on that. And I'm really interested in everyday's life and in almost banal situations and details from everyday's life, even if that everyday's life was happening during the war. Because I feel that's the way how you can give people, especially give victims, a human face back. They will not be numbers anymore, but they will also not be myths anymore. If you make saints and martyrs out of them, then you have a material for the future generation to simply justify the violence that they make. And that's why I'm really eager to remember people, to preserve a memory on the people, but with all their bad sides as well. And I'm not the first one or the only one. A lot of, especially Polish poets, were doing that. And I really appreciate one not that famous but really interesting Polish poet after Second World War, Anna Swieszczynska. She was amazing in that. She would write a poem, about people within the war fighting about something really small and acting in the middle of that situation. Not really noble, not really heroic. And that other side of the medal, that's something that is really interesting. When I say war, I'm really not interested in big heroic stories, in this macho perspective, in this sometimes glorifying the experience of the war. I'm interested in female side of this experience and this everyday side of this experience, and I find this extremely violent period just interesting because everything gets so clear. Everything is so dramatic and drastic and extreme that things get clear. And I think it is something which can be, in a way, useful for poetry. You see people as good as they are and as bad as they are, brought to an extreme. And I find it really interesting material for art in general.
Sie sprechen an mehreren Stellen Ihrer literarischen Arbeit über das Problem der Möglichkeit der Vermarktung von Gewalt und menschlichem Unglück. Ich denke etwa an das Ende des Textes Adagio für Aida, in dem Sie über die gezielte militärische Zerstörung der rečenice der Nationalbibliothek von Bosnien und Herzegowina und die Konsequenzen daraus schreiben. Diese wurde im August 1992 während dem Krieg zerstört, woraufhin beinahe alle dort vorhandenen Bücher verbrannten. Eine kulturelle Katastrophe für Bosnien-Herzegowina. Sie führen am Ende an, man könnte doch auch den Brand der rečenice als 3D-Simulation an Touristen verkaufen, diesen Kontext ökonomisch vermarkten. Wie sehen Sie die Problematik dieser Frage der Vermarktung des Krieges beispielsweise?
Well, I had to deal with it first on a personal level, thinking, what am I going to do with that? As I was already explaining, this big question, what do you do with a war experience? One of the possibilities is you're selling it. And a lot of people do that. Some of them are not even aware of it. And bad perspective of that is the fact that people are expecting that from you. Coming from Bosnia, being a Bosnian writer, this is something which will put you in that box. Let's talk about that. And before you're even realizing that, you find yourself talking about that experience. And it is marketing in one way or another. it is trade. And I find it deeply disturbing, the fact that your very traumatic experience is observed, is seen as a merchandise. And I wasn't aware of that before, but when I was, as a young author, I was in the United States, and there was really a true story behind my poem Trauma Market, when some woman asked me, some American left intellectual asked me, so aren't you just victim who is selling her trauma? And I was shocked and I was deeply offended, and I was thinking, how dare she to ask me? And then I saw myself with her eyes from this capitalist point of view, where you are trading and your experience is a merchandise, and it was kind of illuminating for me. And I said, well, okay, then if I'm doing it, then maybe the experience that I have, it's worth. Maybe this is something which makes me different, and in context of my life, it is painful, but it is precious. It did give me some unique perspective. And of course, I was deeply ironic about that when I kind of admitted, oh yes, I am doing it. But it was new perspective for me. But this trade, this kind of a trade with victims, this is something which is happening on the broader scale in a society in general, not just individually, not just by the artist. And then I see problem there, because again, we are making out of a human experience simply device of trade, and through that we are losing a sense of tragedy, of authenticity, and we are forgetting on what was really wrong in, being trapped or being held in concentration camp or being held under the siege. And even victims are distancing themselves from their own experience because they keep repeating it again and again. And I feel as a poet that there is a great challenge to write about that experience, but to avoid this repetition and this automatic playing, it is like when you press the button play and then you just tell your story and you don't have any connection to it anymore. I understand that for victim that process is normal. This is part of healing as well, but I kind of have problem with that. And just one more thing which I find even more important than talking about this trade with the victims. I think there is a big problem when victims become device for trade in a political sense. When you then just start in the power games to use numbers and to talk about dead or wounded or captured people or refugees just as a merchant. And that is something which makes me deeply unhappy, and this is something when I feel I need to respond, I need to talk about it at least.
I just tell you one thing. I went to a gallery and there was a photo with a bench without wooden sticks, and I by myself thought, oh, it's a photo out of the war. Mm-hmm. And the owner of the gallery, she told me, look, not everything here is about the war. So I saw myself going into this war trap.
Yeah, you go into this stereotype. I have a poem about that also. American friends, when they keep asking me whatever I say, I don't like fast food, I'm afraid of the rooms with no windows, I never wear red lipstick. Whenever I say, they ask, you think it's because of the war?
Would you like to read one of your poems?
This one? This is about my neighborhood where I grew up. It's Alpašino Polje, in new part of the town, this socialist big buildings, and it's always by elitists and aesthetics, it's always preserved as a very ugly neighborhood, and I try to see some beauty in it. Alpašino. Mi smo djeca iz naselja koja se nikad neće naći na razglednicama. U naš kraj turisti ne zalaze. Mi ne dobivamo predsjedničke izbore u drugom krugu i nijedan jezik ne govorimo bolje nego maternji. Ne znamo da imamo braću blizance u svim gradovima svijeta. U naš kraj turisti ne zalaze. Ovdje ništa nije znamenito. Osnovna škola, samoposluga i jedan stari orah odavno posječen. U naš kraj turisti ne zalaze i nemamo im pokazati ništa osim sebe.
Frau Bašić, Sie sind in der sozialistisch-föderativen Republik Jugoslawien groß geworden. Welches Erbe hat sich für Sie bezüglich der Gender-Thematik aus dem Kontext der sozialistisch-föderativen Union Jugoslawiens ergeben? Wurden diese Fragen in dieser Form des Sozialismus gestellt und waren sie Thema und konnten Sie nach dem Krieg darauf zurückgreifen oder mussten diese Fragen völlig von vorne wieder aufgerollt werden?
This is actually a very good point that you stressed out the lack of continuity. The war is kind of a gap in the society, in the memory, in the experience that somehow brings people in a position to forget everything what happened before. And sometimes I feel that we are doing the same job again as a women, that we are fighting again some battles that were fought 30, 50, 40 years ago. And I'm not sure that war is the only reason, but it is the fact that that social change brought a new wave of traditionalism. People became more, in certain ways, first more traditional, patriarchal, radical, and some freedoms that were normal 30, 40 years ago, now we are going one step backward. For instance, the lack of social stability or lack of a feeling of social stability makes really hard for women to find their place. The lack of very basic social care, such as, sick leave, all those things that were normal in a socialism, now it looks like a big privilege, almost impossible, something which is given really to the very narrow elite. For me, it's interesting to observe the process of emancipation through, 3 generations of Bosnian women. One of them, let's say, the generation of my grandmother that lived before the socialism, and then the generation of my mother who lived during socialism, and my generation. I think that on this road of emancipation, women were getting more and more duties and not that many privileges. Because the old duties that my grandmother had, such as a household or taking care of your baby or, having social role somehow of a second class, this is something which remains through all these years. Generation of my mother preserved all that duties, but got possibility or privilege of being economically independent, and their generation started to work. Mostly they weren't that well educated and worked in the factories, but they got some possibility to earn their own money. But also they had to work 8 or 10 hours a day. And then my generation inherited all these duties, and then there is a new layer. You are expected as a woman to have a career, not just to have some average job and to get some money, to bring some bread to your table, but also to have an academic career, to get well educated, or to look good, which is also some kind of aesthetic fascism. In order to be taken seriously as a public figure, you had to look decent. And I'm afraid that this pile of these duties is getting bigger and bigger, and that the privileges are not growing that fast as the duties are.
Nun haben Sie selbst ein Studium der Literaturwissenschaften abgeschlossen, sowie einen Master im Bereich Menschenrechte, unterrichten als Assistenzprofessorin an der Philosophischen Fakultät in Sarajevo. Sie sind Journalistin, Literaturkritikerin und Lyrikerin. War es schwer für Sie, in diese Position zu kommen?
I would say that main problem is not to get there. Much bigger problem is to stay there. When you start researching Bosnian literature, and when you are looking for major female figures in Bosnian history, there will be so few of them that you can really, there were not much many than the fingers on one hand. Women who remained in public life for many years. If you want to talk about, people who are there, women who are there more than 20 years, there are really very few of them, because they get so subtle and so more or less violent, discouraged, that after some time they leave. Being very ambitious kid from family of the workers, I got access to education, and even during the war, for me, that was an imperative. It was, getting educated was something for the working class in communism. That was the idea of getting better life, and education was seen as something extremely important and valuable. Nowadays, it's not like that anymore. But during the socialism, there was some plan behind it. We can argue now if this plan was good or bad, but there was a structure and plan how to make it. And many people got education for the first time. The rate of illiterate people became incredibly lower during that period. The economic prosperity was better. The industry was flourishing, and you had companies making things for all over the world. My father, his factory was one of the world's powerful companies, one part of the Energoinvest company called TAT, and they made parts for nuclear plants, and they were exporting in the whole world. And now the ideas that we are getting for returnees and refugees is, why don't you grow strawberries? There is no social strategy for Bosnia now.
Von mehreren Seiten wird konstatiert, Europa befindet sich nicht nur in einer wirtschaftlichen, sondern auch in einer intellektuellen Krise. Diesbezüglich wird davon gesprochen, dass die Fähigkeit abhanden gekommen wäre, gesellschaftspolitische Zukunftsperspektiven projizieren zu können. Der gegenwärtig noch mögliche Zukunftsbezug, so diese Stimmen, sei der von Wirtschaftsprognosen. Meinen Sie, dass, gesetzt dem Fall, diese Stimmen haben recht, die ehemaligen sozialistischen Länder aus ihrer geschichtlichen Erfahrung heraus dazu beitragen können, Europa aus dieser intellektuellen Krise zu führen?
Well, it would be possible if we would be seen as equal partners. Then it would be possible to use our experience from socialism and to talk critically about European Union nowadays, and then maybe we could make some improvement, bring some flesh blood. But what is happening is that even in our countries, you have denial toward that socialist experience, and people are so strongly trying to forget what was good about the system before that it is almost cynical, and when people whose experience that was, okay, I was a kid, I do not remember a lot, but there are stories of my family, there is this oral tradition that preserves memory on a time that was simply different, and put away nostalgia. They were things who were functioning well, such as social welfare or industry or education system. Now we have to change it as much as possible, forgetting that we had educational system which was a little bit old-fashioned, but it was good. It was not for elite, it was accessible to different people. And now what we are seeing, if parents are not ready to pay for this schooling, this talent will most probably, get lost.
Sie haben Hertha Müller erwähnt. Nun warnt Hertha Müller immer wieder davor, dass die europäischen Demokratien vielleicht nicht so stabil sind, wie dies den Anschein hat. Diese Warnung zielt darauf ab, dass der Einfluss einer pseudodemokratischen Großmacht Russland sowie die vielen Bereiche, die sich aus der Diktatur in Rumänien erhalten haben, oder eine völlig neue Form der Aushöhlung demokratischer Prozesse, wie dies gegenwärtig in Ungarn der Fall ist, nicht unterschätzt werden sollten. Es ist anzunehmen, dass Bosnien und Herzegowina in den nächsten 10 Jahren der EU beitreten wird. In diesen 10 Jahren kann aber noch viel geschehen. Hegen Sie manchmal Sorge, dass Bosnien und Herzegowina sich in diesen kommenden Jahren von einem demokratischen Verständnis politischer Prozesse wegbewegen könnte?
Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't have much illusions about what the process of going toward European Union is bringing to democratization process in one country. On one level, certain changes in Bosnian society are consequence of this pressure to become part of the EU, and there are some good legislations which are consequence of that. But speaking of society which will be more stable, open-minded, democratic, I'm not very optimistic, and I don't have much of expectations from this EU process that will bring big change in Bosnia, because Bosnia is so deeply messed up and it is so unsolved case which is done badly back in 95. The legislation was left not really functioning well and everyone was happy just to stop war, and the last 15 years are showing that. It seems almost cynical to put pressure on that state or on that people now to run toward EU as a promise of some kind of a prosperity and democracy, especially when you see what is going on, what are the processes within the union itself, and what are the issues and problems. And I don't think that it will be any kind of a magical solution for Bosnia. And of course, our political elite is mainly deeply corrupted, and those are people who are only capable to take care of their own financial interests. And I do not expect them to make major changes. But the major instruction that we are getting from the EU is your politicians are bad, they are not doing a good job, you will actually never become part of our society, you will never be one of the equals. It is just a matter of political interest if we will once, and I'm not sure that will be in 10 years, want Bosnia for whatever reason to be our part. But we are not seen as a mature partner who is, doing its own job and making progress toward something better. That was illusion, and some people believed in it in first years after the war. Okay, now we will go through some democratization processes, but the processes that transition brought are so superficial, so artificial, and based not really solid. So that's why the situation on a daily basis is really complicated, and I'm not optimistic, and things are not going fast forward. All what we get is criticism, and I'm frustrated with the expectation of again quick fixes within the society. Oh, you had a war. Oh, we are so sorry to hear about that. Now we have to go back. We will have a bunch of NGOs who will promote human rights and democracy, and we will give them some money for that. And if you are not doing that fast enough, then there is something deeply wrong with you. And you have people who are dealing with a deep traumas and who are struggling to survive in their everyday life. And if they are slow, I think it is natural in a way. Western democratic countries have a long tradition of leading democratic and being democratic. And it took them centuries to be there where they are now. And you cannot expect from country torn apart by the war to go through this process in, 20 years, with the majority of people who are politically completely immature. If you give them democracy, you cannot expect them to flourish, in 1 year or another. We can speak about being colonized before or being manipulated before. But now the only idea and the only strategy that you get is, oh, wonderful, we got a sweet little market which is hungry and exhausted and not really critical toward anything, and we will get this lucrative niche. One of the major reasons why Bosnia is not functioning well is that back in the 90s, European Union as well as United States just wanted to have this thing quickly done, not really going deeply into problem, and the quick fix that we got then is leaking now. And we are expecting that besides that leaking and falling apart, we are supposed to, show some progress, and encouragement is not really honest. The encouragement that we get from EU, I don't feel it being very authentic.
Sie hörten ein Interview mit der bosnischen Lyrikerin, Assistenzprofessorin und Literaturkritikerin Adisa Bašić. Hinweise zur Sendung, zur Literatur von Bašić sowie weitere Informationen zu den im Interview angesprochenen Themenbereichen finden Sie auf der Radio Orange Homepage unter der Rubrik Wörtlich. Die Musik zur Sendung kam von der Band Dubiosa Collective. In der kommenden Sendung hören Sie ein Gespräch mit dem Schriftsteller Faruk Šehić. Dieses ist wieder am 3. Montag im Monat, also am 16. Juni von 13 bis 14 Uhr. Bis dahin ein schönes Leben.